Good afternoon, boys and girls. The story for class 11 from your short story anthology, Echoes, is story number 6, The Chinese Statue. A wonderful story, interesting, long story, nevertheless, it is interesting. Now, the Chinese statue talks about appearance and reality. Whatever you see is not the real thing. Not always, but sometimes there is a difference between whatever you see and whatever that thing is in reality. So, one of the basic themes of the story is appearance and reality. One. Second is the main protagonist, that is Sir Alexander Heathcote, his love for art. He loves architecture, he loves all kinds of antique curios and specimens. 2. Third is a certain respect towards customs and traditions. That in the course of the story, I will tell you how this particular theme of respect towards customs and traditions comes across. And the fourth theme is the desire to own exotic pieces, exotic things, exotic arts. Now let us go to this particular story. You can see on the screen on page 58, 59 is when the story begins, 58. I'm reading towards the last part of that paragraph. The Chinese statue by Jeffrey Archer is about the journey of a statue of Emperor Kong. The Chinese statue is of Emperor Kong, acquired by this person, Sir Alexander Heathcote. Sir is a title that is given to him. Sir Alexander Heathcote. Who is he? A British diplomat, and he acquired this statue of Emperor Kong when he was posted in China. So this is what the Chinese statue is all about. The journey of the Chinese statue from Sir Alexander Heathcote to the successors of Alexander Heathcote, and then ultimately to the auction house at Sotheby's in London. How it goes from a person who buys it and ultimately it has to be auctioned. What was the reason? Now, if we can take the story itself. The Chinese statue by Jeffrey Archer. The little Chinese statue was the next item to come. When the story opens, we are in the auction house. And the little Chinese statue is being auctioned. The main auctioneer, who is calling out the numbers, the money that the statue will be sold at, to bidders who have come to quote the price of the statue. Some serious bidders and some onlookers, people who've just come to see the proceedings of this auction. The little Chinese statue was the next item to come under the auctioneer's hammer. If you've seen in films, the auctioneer has a hammer and he sounds the table to let everyone come to silence. Under the auctioneer's hammer, lot 103 caused those quiet murmurings that always precede the sale of a masterpiece. Remember, it was an antique piece. It was a piece that was very expensive. So, as soon as the auctioneer's hammer was sounded, there were people who were murmuring, who were whispering something with one another. That always precede means it comes before a sale of a masterpiece. The auctioneer's assistant held up the delicate piece of ivory. He held it up like this for the packed audience to admire, while the auctioneer glanced around the room to be sure he knew where the serious bidders were seated. I studied, the narrator has come here also to see the proceedings and perhaps be one of the bidders. I studied my catalogue. They're given a list, a catalogue. They're given a list, and the thing that is to be actioned, the details of that particular piece is also written. And read the detailed description of the piece and what was known of his history. The detailed description was read, and here in this paragraph we see the description. The statue had been purchased in Hali Shua. Now you have to know these names, okay? They're not very difficult names, but still. Hali Shua in 1871. And what was referred to as what Sotheby is described as the property. What is Sotheby? Sotheby is the auctioneer house. What is Sotheby? Sotheby is the auctioning house where the auctioning is taking place. The auctioning house. Okay, it's a very, very famous auctioning house in London. It still exists even today. Sotheby refers to this particular Chinese statue as the property of a gentleman, usually meaning that some member of the aristocracy did not wish to admit that he was having to sell off one of the family heirlooms. Heirlooms is something, some khandani thing which comes from one person to another, from one generation to another generation. Right? Another generation gets it as a, a gift or something which her mother-in-law, the mother or the grandmother will pass on. Something which is passed on from one generation to another generation. So the person who was selling this did not want his name to be revealed. So it was just said, this is the property of a gentleman, because this particular piece was being sold and it was acquired as a family heirloom. I wondered that was the case on this occasion, and I decided to, if this was the case, actually whether it was being sold or not. So he said, let me see actually what is the history of this Chinese statue. What caused the little Chinese statue to find its way into the auction rooms on that Thursday morning over 100 years later? Again, the auctioneer said, Lot 103, what am I bid for this magnificent piece of? And he put it up. Now we come to the past. Actually, where did this Chinese statue actually come from? We come to the main person, Sir Alexander Heathcote. Sir Alexander Heathcote, he was the person who actually acquired this particular statue. Sir Alexander Heathcote, as well as being a gentleman, was an exact man, exact, very precise. He got up the same time in the morning, went to office at exactly every day the same time, had his breakfast exactly at a particular time. Everything he did was at one time every day, daily. He was exactly 6'3", quarter inches tall, rose every day at 7 o'clock, joined his wife as breakfast, every day to have the same breakfast, one boiled egg cooked for precisely 4 minutes, two pieces of toast with one spoonful of Cooper's marmalade. Marmalade is a kind of jelly and jam, and 1 cup of China tea. He would then take a hackney carriage, a horse-driven carriage, from his home at 11 Cadogan Gardens at exactly 8:20 and arrive at the Foreign Office at promptly 8:59, returning home again at the stroke of 6. So how exact, how precise this man was. Sir Alexander had been exact from an early age, as became the only son of a general. His father was a general in the army. But unlike his father, he chose to serve his queen in the diplomatic service, another exacting calling. He did not join the army like his father. He wanted to serve the country, serve the queen and thus the country. Now he was promoted because of his own sincerity. He progressed from a shared desk at the Foreign Office in Whitehall to third secretary in Calcutta, to second secretary in Vienna, to first secretary in Rome, to deputy ambassador in Washington, and finally he becomes a minister in Peking, that is in China. Today, the capital of China is Beijing. Earlier, this name Beijing was known as Peking. He was delighted when Mr. Gladstone, who is Mr. Gladstone, the then Prime Minister of UK, when Mr. Gladstone invited him to represent the government in China, as he had for some considerable time taken more than an amateur interest in the art of the Ming dynasty. So Alexander took an amateur interest, not professional. We can't say unprofessional, but not professional. He had an interest in the art of the Ming dynasty. This crowning appointment, he wanted to go to China. He actually wanted to go to China. So, this was an important appointment for him. Could afford him what until then he would have considered impossible, an opportunity to observe their natural habitat, some of the great statues there in China itself, paintings, drawings, which had previously he would be able to admire only in books. Once Alexander arrived in Peking after a journey by sea and land that took his party nearly 2 months, he presented his seals patents. When you go to the Queen, you have to give your credentials. Credentials. Your credentials that have come from this country, and the country only gives you those credentials to be presented to the Queen. To Emperor Zusi, and a personal letter which the Empress will read privately from Queen Victoria. The Empress, dressed from head to toe in white and gold, received her new ambassador in the throne room of the Imperial Palace. She read the letter from the British monarch while Sir Alexander remained standing to attention. After all, he is in front of the Empress. Her Imperial Highness revealed nothing of its contents to the new minister, only wishing him a successful term of office in his appointment. She then moved her lips slightly, meaning they don't talk loudly, very softly, moving her lips to tell Sir Alexander, that the audience had come to an end, means their meeting had come to an end. As he was conducted back through the great imperial palace, the halls are huge and great. Alexander's walking slowly. He is looking his right, his left, everywhere, because there was a magnificent collection of ivory and jade statues. Ivory and jade, the very precious stones, which was scattered casually around the building, much in the way Cellini and Michelangelo. And who are Cellini and Michelangelo? Cellini is a sculptor and Michelangelo is an Italian painter. Right? Today lie stacked against each other in Florence. So they were just lying, not Cellini and Michelangelo's statues made by them, but statues just stacked, and they were lying and they were scattered here and there. As his ministerial appointment was only for 3 years, Sir Alexander took no leave but preferred to use his time to put the embassy behind him and travel on horseback. This was just a diplomatic job, so he didn't have to do too many things. So he thought that he's going to make the most use of those 3 years. So whenever he used to get some time, and he had enough time, he would travel on his horseback into the outlying districts to learn more about the country and its people. And every time on these trips, he was accompanied by a Mandarin. Who is a Mandarin? A Chinese translator. In China, you have to speak in Chinese. Very difficult for them to understand any other language. So the Mandarin helps you to translate the language you are speaking, that is, Sir Alexander spoke in English, into Chinese for other people to understand Sir Alexander. So a Mandarin always accompanied him from the palace staff. See, it is written here as an interpreter and guide. Okay. On one such journey, passing through the muddy streets of a small village, with but a few houses called Hali Shua. Remember, this village was called Hali Shua, a distance about 50 miles from Peking. Sir Alexander chanced upon an old craftsman's working place, a very small, a shed kind of thing, small house. Now he wanted to see what this was all about. So he left his servants. The minister dismounted. See this word? Dismounted, meaning came down from his horse and entered the ramshackle wooden workshop. The ramshackle. What is the meaning of ramshackle? It means it was in a, what is the meaning of ramshackle? It means it was in a bad condition. That particular wooden workshop was in a bad condition, ramshackle. To admire, but it had beautiful, delicate pieces of ivory and jade statues. They were all crammed, they were all absolutely packed on the shelves from floor to ceiling. Although modern, the pieces were superbly executed by an experienced craftsman, and the minister entered the little hut with the thought of that I'll go to just maybe just acquire a memento, something in remembrance. Right? So he entered the shop for that. Once in the shop, he could hardly move in any direction. Why? Because it was such a small shop, and if he would move here and there, all the statues, the small statues, would come falling down. The building had not been designed because he was, remember, a 6'3" man and 6'3" and quarter. So it was a big building. So Alexander stood still and enthralled. He was absolutely mesmerized. When you say enthralled, I'll give you a better word. I'll give you an easier word. He was actually charmed. Okay? Taking in the fine scented jasmine smell that hung in the air. An old craftsman came forward. He was wearing a long blue kuli robe. You see these Chinese craftsmen, they wear long coats, a kuli kind of a robe, flat black hat to greet him. A jet black pigtail fell down his back. He bowed very low and then looked up at the giant because he was a small looking man and sized man, and Sir Alexander was very tall. The minister returned the bow. The craftsman bowed to Sir Alexander. The minister returned the bow, while the Mandarin explained who Sir Alexander was to the craftsman and his desire to be allowed to look at the work of the craftsman. The old man was nodding in agreement even before the Mandarin had come to the end of his request. For the old man, it was an honor to see to his guest, to see what his guest wants. For over an hour, the minister sighed and chuckled. Meaning of the word chuckled. Chuckled means it. He laughed inwardly. He was so happy to see all this, all the statues. As he studied many of the pieces with admiration and finally returned to the old man to tell him it was really very good, to praise him. The craftsman bowed once again, and his shy smile revealed no teeth, but only genuine pleasure at Sir Alexander's compliments. Compliments meaning praises.